Sucker punched, executed, turned into a pet, consumed by hatred, imprisoned, melted down, and curb stomped.
Brought to you by Disney Channel.
Today we're ranking Disney Channel villain fates got off easy to worse than death. Let's begin with the characters who got a second chance after all their evil doing. These are the redeemed villains. Kicking things off are three of our least evil antagonists, the Gross sisters from the Proud family. These three were among the most unsavory characters in the original series, to the point where pretty much their entire shtick was mugging children, even if they did occasionally have Penny's back, sometimes even more than her own friends. I should probably mention that they're children too, but still, mugging is pretty bad.
Welcome to our hood.
Thankfully, in the revival, someone finally said okay to their hands-up cash-out request. They're in a nicer neighborhood and even working as a rap trio, stating that they're done with bullying, which proves that the only reason they were bullies in the first place was because they needed money. Man, don't you love it when a character genuinely learns their lesson? On top of that, they even accepted their almost disturbingly blue skin. Good for them. Next is Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz. Without a doubt, one of the most unforgettable villains in Disney Channel history, and that's largely due to the fact that he honestly barely qualifies as a villain.
Perfect! Now I can pee all over the tri-state area!
I mean, sure, he's constantly creating innators that place the tri-state area in imminent danger as he tries to rule the people therein in various increasingly bizarre and sometimes petty ways. But you have to remember that Doof has one of the most messed up origin stories in cartoon villain history. Seriously, I could bring up literally any flashback of his childhood throughout the series, and just about any one of them individually would justify this guy going at least a little crazy.
How do you know when you're really lame?
When you sell bratwurst?
Forced to dress as a girl because his parents wanted a daughter, forced to act as a garden gnome for hours at a time, literally stood up at his own birth.
When I was a young boy, my mother would never let me swim in public pools.
No.
His parents defied the laws of nature and reality to give him a horrible childhood, which Vanessa helps him realize in The Last Day of Summer, the season 4 finale we thought was a series finale for 10 years. Hey, I'm not complaining. After Vanessa helps Doof realize he isn't actually evil, but just genuinely hurting, Doofenshmirtz decides to quit making evil innators for good so he can support his daughter and maintain a healthy relationship with her.
A good guy? Me? I could be... Well, I guess I could. I could be a do-gooder, doing good, just for the sake of doing good. Or what exactly do good guys do?
He also remains on good terms with Perry, Major Monogram, and Carl years after the finale, apparently going on weekly bowling trips with them. Not only did Doofenshmirtz finally find the friends he didn't know he needed all his life, but he also completely dodged legal repercussions for his actions that regularly threatened both the tri-state area and sometimes even the space-time continuum. That's a seriously generous fate for him. But if it's any villain on this list who deserved such a happy ending, let's face it, we all know it's Doof. And for our last fully redeemed villains, we have Shago and Dr. Draken from Kim Possible. These two were usually a package deal. While Shago was the one more or less pulling the strings most of the time, Dr. Draken was still a pretty dangerous guy in his own right.
Surely you know of my work.
Sorry,
Think for a minute and come to you. I'm a genius.
I really don't know.
Dr. Drac.
As childish and petty as he could be, this megalomaniac had the smarts and resources to do basically whatever his crazy self wanted to do. As for Shago, she's got warrants out for her arrest in 11 countries and is a highly dangerous mercenary who constantly works with people just as evil as her, if not more so.
Okay, guess we're back to this.
Surprisingly though, in the series finale, these two both get a pretty sweet opportunity to atone for their crimes. When Draken and Kim are both captured by Warmanga, they have to work together to escape, and in the end, both Draken and Shago end up helping save the world and getting some praise from the people for it. It's one heck of a turnaround for their lives, and about as happy an ending as a mad scientist and an almost cold-blooded mercenary could hope for. Now, this next category is similar, but while these characters also dodged most of the comeuppance they earned, we feel a little less satisfied about it. These guys got off easy. Some villains face harsh punishments for their actions, others still are able to reform and become better people, leading to overall better lives for themselves. Lord Hater is interesting in that he really doesn't do either of these things. The guy's hobbies include world domination, violence, terrorism, and all sorts of horrible crimes, so when Wander shows up in his life, he has to be faced with a guy who's just too darned nice to not want to be friends with him, despite all his crimes. In the season 2 finale, which unbeknownst to the creators at the time would be the series finale, finale, Hater would team up with Wander to help defeat a greater evil, only to then insist the two weren't buddies despite teaming up to defeat a major threat, which seems like buddy behavior to me. What's next? You're gonna tell me Kirby and King Dedede aren't buddies? Get out of here. Now, it's probably the case that Hater was planned to have a redemption arc in the 3rd season, but from what we actually have, Hater neither redeemed himself nor fully committed to being evil and paying for his crimes. He just got away with it. The worst he got was his plans being thwarted by Wander and Sylvia, and considering how constantly he bounces back, not to mention the fun he has hating on them, I think he's more grateful to have a worthy rival than anything else. She may have a similar name, but don't be fooled, Lord Dominator is nothing like Lord Hater. She's an unapologetic force of world-dominating cruelty and has nothing in the ballpark of a redeeming quality. She's so cruel that her threat to the universe made Lord Hater unsettled enough to team up with his arch-nemesis Wander to defeat her.
That was
Amazing!
They would ultimately be successful in doing this, but this wouldn't be the end of her story, since Wander would save her life at the very last moment before her ship exploded. It's gotta be the most utterly undeserved act of mercy on this entire list.
You realize I, demolished your entire galaxy?
You'd be surprised what you can grow from a little bit of kindness.
Which is to say that Wander is just too pure for this world, man. Now let's talk about Magicka the Spell. As one of the most memorable antagonists in both the original series and the reboot, I'm sure everyone was hyped to see her make her return as the 1st season's main villain.
Hey, wait up!
In the finale, though, she sadly ends up as little more than a pawn for Bradford Buzzard, who we'll get to later. After she and the other villains are defeated by the Ducks and freed of their brainwashing, Magicka is actually the one who gets to exact direct revenge on Bradford, which, again, we'll get to later. On top of that, the fact that she was allowed to just walk away from the Ducks and presumably rethink whether the family feud was really worth it, she got dealt one of the easiest hands on this list by a long shot. Reboots have made weird changes to their characters before, but few so much as Doofus Drake. In what was apparently an effort to create a foil to Louis, reminding the younger members of the audience that unchecked access to money can corrupt you if you aren't careful, Doofus was turned from a friendly ally of the trio in the OG series to a power-hungry, Gideon Gleeful cosplayer in the reboot. The "he's just a kid" excuse can only go so far when this guy's crimes include enslaving his own parents to work as servants for him.
That's nice.
Louis ends up on Doofus's bad side after committing the heinous crime of lying to him about being an only child, I think. Honestly, he could have probably spilled a drop of soda on Doofus's carpet and gotten the same reaction. This kid is unhinged. Even so, after all the horrendous stuff Drake puts him through, not the least of which being stalking, in Drake's final major appearance, Louis still apologizes to him, if for no other reason than to keep him from having the same lifelong enemy status so many of his uncle's rivals do.
And while you may be a freaky, weird, entitled monster kid, I'm still sorry for any pain that I caused you.
The guy basically got away with constantly terrorizing one of the main characters and victimizing himself for it. Literally, his only sympathetic quality is the fact that he's 10 and thus has time to grow, but even taking that into account, he deserved a lot more comeuppance. David Xanatos may not be nearly as vile as Gargoyles' other big bad, but don't go thinking he's a model citizen. He'll use anyone, and frankly everyone he can, to get ahead in life, and if lives have to be ruined in the process, so be it.
Save your breath, Hudson. Death and old age have their price as well.
Still, there are some lengths even he won't go to, like when Demona uses him to cast a spell that would turn all of humanity to stone. Xanatos was willing to team up with Gargoyles to help stop her.
Looks like your plan will work, Xanatos.
I had no doubt about that.
And ultimately helped end the feud between humans and Gargoyles for good.
You know, all this time I've wondered why I let you creatures live. Now I know. You come in handy now and then.
As do you.
He isn't a good guy by any measure, but he's not entirely evil. Either way you look at it, he did get a pretty light sentence. It's finally time for another supernatural threat, the Huntsmaster from American Dragon Jake Long. This guy is definitely one of Disney Channel's most despicable antagonists, blackmailing Rose, a 14-year-old girl, with her parents' lives.
I know the exact location of your parents.
Effectively forcing her to help complete his goal of gathering the Aztec skulls to make a wish for the death of all magical creatures. He wants to do this because magic is evil and dangerous, except when he does it, then it's totally reasonable, actually. That kind of hypocrisy it really seems to be a trend with Disney villains, huh? Well, thankfully, in the end, Rose manages to knock him out and steal his wish, wishing for the deaths of all Hunt's clan members instead. While being wished out of existence would have been pretty traumatic, he was unconscious for it, so sadly, despite how evil he was, he basically got the whole died in his sleep ending. Now, let's talk about the non-lethal fates. You might feel like these guys got off a little easy, but if nothing else, they at least faced the music for their crimes. They were just lucky enough to not have to die for them. I'm not not sure we'd call it gleeful per se, but Gideon Gleeful actually had a pretty decent arc during Weird-Mageddon. Despite being a child, agreeing to help Bill Cipher was a pretty despicable thing for Gideon to do, even compared to the other stuff he does in the series.
I'll get you all!
And nonetheless, in the end, Dipper helps talk some sense into him so that he'll stop helping Bill take over the world, for Mabel's sake at least.
You know what Bill would do to me if that happens?
What, you're scared of Bill?
No, it's a complicated situation.
While he was punished severely by Bill for his betrayal, he came out of the experience a much better person who's genuinely trying to improve himself as a person.
No more evil doing. From now on, I'm gonna try to be a little Gideon, regular old kid.
What's more, he's still friends with his old prison buddies, and you know what they say, there's nothing less suspicious than several grown men in prison jumpsuits hanging out with a small child who's also in a prison jumpsuit. Kikimora is up next. Poor Kikimora suffers from a tragic illness known as chronic minion syndrome. In other words, as much as she desperately clings to whatever power she can find, she's always ending up subservient to somebody else.
So, what's the promotion? Who's under my command?
Pretty much everything she did throughout the series was basically a means of glazing Emperor Belos so he'd keep her by his side, only for him to quite literally tell her to go die in a ditch.
You're looking for a new right hand?
Have you as my right hand? I'd sooner cut off my whole arm.
We actually don't see much of Kikimora after she switches sides in the final battle, though in the epilogue we do see Bartholomew supervising her as she helps build the library's museum wings, so I'm guessing her assistance in the finale reduced her sentence from life without parole to community service.
If that means kicking the Emperor's butt, gladly.
You guys know she probably killed a lot of people, right? Like, good for the library folks getting free labor, but I feel like she needs a bit more comeuppance than that. Now let's talk about everyone's favorite Aladdin villain, Abbas Mal. Move over, Jafar. This is peak supervillainy right here. Jokes aside, Abbas Mal is pretty much your run-of-the-mill bumbling thief with the added bonus of being particularly determined.
How touching.
The worst fates he suffers in the series are basically just the consequences of his own greed-induced schemes. One day he'll be arrested, the next beaten up, the next chased out of town, and we can't forget how in Return of Jafar he was left dangling from a tree for several hours as he accepted the loss of a potentially life-changing wish. Given how much bad stuff he's done though, Abbas Mal has earned just about every butt-kicking he's been given, and then some. Mitch from Phineas and Ferb is next, and with him finally comes the legal repercussions these villains have earned. He comes with one of the most timeless forms of punishment around, a good old-fashioned timeout. After trying to take over the world by becoming the cutest thing in existence, he's thwarted thanks to Meep in a surprisingly one-sided fight and forced into a timeout, see prison sentence, as atonement for his crimes.
Meep.
This naturally wouldn't stop him from basically trying the same thing again and getting the same punishment again. Mario has Wario, the Crimson Chin has the Nega Chin, and Darkwing Duck has, you guessed it, Nega Duck. Actually, Wario feels kind of out of place in this group, but I digress. Nega Duck is Darkwing's Negaverse counterpart, and for a long time you could basically sum up his character as Darkwing, but evil. The guy's cartoonishly evil, even by cartoon standards. One time he went on a crime spree for no other reason than to bump his rank up from Public Enemy number 2 to Public Enemy number 1.
With all that power, who can stop me?
Being a Saturday morning cartoon villain, his fate more or less begins and ends with him getting various levels of comeuppance after he causes havoc for 11 to 22 minutes.
I'll never sleep again!
But in the 2017 DuckTales reboot, we actually got a pretty interesting lore dump on this guy. Apparently, Negaduck was originally an actor named James Starling who played Darkwing Duck on TV before he was even a real-life hero.
Wait, who is that?
When Drake Mallard stole his role on the show, Jimmy here went completely insane and vowed revenge on his sworn nemesis as the infamous Negaduck. That puts his crimes in a much more tragic light. Well, that is, if you choose to believe that they're the same characters from the original series. We do. It's way more fun that way. One of the biggest lessons to learn from a kid's cartoon is to never underestimate a tiny villain. Dr. Hamsterville is up next, and you'd best believe he earned his sentence. Hamsterville is a mastermind who's influential enough to order Gantu around to do his bidding. We see this in the Leroy and Stitch movie, which was effectively the Lilo and Stitch cartoon series finale. Here, Hamsterville, with Gantu's help, forces Jumba to build him his own original character, Leroy, do not steal. To the untrained eye, Leroy is just a Red Stitch. To the trained eye, Leroy is a Red Stitch who Hamsterville plans to clone into an entire army to take over the world. Of course, in typical mad scientist fashion, Hamsterville is taken down and arrested for his crimes. Given the gravity of what he's done over the years, it's hard to imagine him getting out anytime soon, but he does have a powerful and loyal ally in Gantu, so he at least has that going for him. Of course, once Gantu's arrested, he's basically screwed, and considering how much less competent Gantu was in the show compared to the movie, we can't say that's unlikely. Now let's talk about another spin-off series villain who had unfinished business from his movie to attend to. Professor Callahan from Big Hero 6 was definitely one of Disney's most infamous villains, and I mean that in terms of both writing and actions. He comes so close to being a fully sympathetic character, but then there's the little detail of him blaming Tadashi, his own student, for the death he faced while trying to save Callahan himself. But as you might expect with a little more introspection, Callahan was absolutely coping with that statement. It was a twisted way of alleviating himself of his guilt, and we see that on full display when he makes a return in the animated series. We find out that Callahan is in prison paying for his self-admitted unforgivable mistake. While there's no telling how long his sentence will last, he's taking full accountability for his crimes and even got the opportunity to apologize to Hiro.
Tadashi would have wanted me to forgive you. Someday I hope I can.
He's not going to have the same life he once did, but we wouldn't call him beyond saving. If nothing else, he'll at least have a peaceful conscience knowing that he's taking the right accountability, and honestly, good on him for that. We just hope his daughter visits him often. If there were ever a villain who fully embodied the concept of regret, it'd have to be King Andreas. Now, Andreas was absolutely a villain, we're not denying that.
This hand?
We are denying, however, that he's fully to blame for the atrocities he committed. He was manipulated by both his father and the Core to conquer the multiverse with the help of the Calamity Box. And no, we did not forget what this man did to Marcy either.
Now look what you've made me do.
But despite his misdeeds, he ultimately redeemed himself by standing up to his father and the Core, helping to take them down once and for all.
Don't believe this. You're finally doing something useful?
After helping Anne and the gang, he spent the rest of his life genuinely lamenting what he'd done to Amphibia and was sentenced to helping rebuild it as a farmer. While he has the opportunity to atone for his sins and help to repair what he broke, he's still going to be living with some serious guilt for the rest of his life, not to mention how he'd wasted the majority of it on a conquest that wasn't really even his. But now let's move on to the characters who got more final endings. These are the gruesome deaths. But this is Disney Channel, so I guess death is being used pretty loosely here. On that note, this category starts with one character who's actually still alive, Bill Cipher. Man, talk about a pathetic end. Can you believe such a brilliant antagonist fell for the oldest trick in the book? The old twin sibling switcheroo? All it took for Bill to trap himself in Grunkle Stan's mind was one moment of overconfidence.
No, 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 no! Oh yeah, you're going down, Bill.
Not knowing Stan and Ford had switched clothes, he gladly accepted Ford's deal to let him enter his mind in exchange for letting his family go free. Come on, Bill, they don't even have the same voice actor. Even so, the plan worked on some level. Even the all-powerful Bill was left in a complete panic as he begged Stan to spare him.
You're making a mistake. I'll give you anything. Money, fame, riches, infinite power, your own galaxy, please.
Dude was so freaked out he started switching art styles and talking backwards, and all that wasn't enough to save him from one final sucker punch from Stan as the burning walls of his memory closed in. The only reason Bill's not even higher is the fact that he's been teased to return on many occasions, not the least of which being the recent Book of Bill that came out a few months back.
Did you miss me? Admit it, you missed me.
But for an absolute menace like Bill, coming so close to world domination only to lose it all due to one stupid mistake is still a pretty brutal way to end your story. So even though he's not dead, we had to give him a pretty high spot nonetheless. Well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions. Next up is Mozenrath, the main villain of Aladdin's animated series. Written as a dark parallel of Aladdin, this guy's only bright spot is that disturbingly pale skin. But jokes aside, make no mistake, this guy is a menace. The kid betrayed his adoptive father and mentor Destain, who to be fair was a massive piece of crap, to take his place as the ruler of the land of Black Sand, and then went one step further by turning him into his own zombie servant.
Sure you did.
This dude means business, but his one weakness is the source of his magic. His power comes from a magical gauntlet stolen from Disdain, but it would ultimately, and ironically, be his undoing.
Yeah, that magic hand of yours really annoys me.
What?
The gauntlet's power is constantly draining Mozenrath's body of its energy, making him visibly, physically weak despite being an adept sorcerer. So in addition to having the usual Saturday morning cartoon villain defeat, his first appearance takes things to a whole new level of darkness. After Mozenrath straight up directly states that his gauntlet is killing him,
you see, I'm going to transport my essence into your body.
He comes up with a plan to kidnap Aladdin and forcibly swap bodies with him, and in the end, when he's thwarted, Aladdin steals his gauntlet one last time before sending him away on a hot air balloon ride that presumably went straight up to the great beyond.
No, this isn't fair!
Well, I don't think he'll be on the higher side of that, but still, dude's almost certainly dead. Blind Ivan is one of Gravity Falls' more minor antagonists, but he's also one of the ones who caused the most chaos. It's thanks to his Society of the Blind Eye that the residents of Gravity Falls never remember seeing the weird stuff that goes on there.
It is unseen.
This guy has erased countless minds despite knowing the toll the memory wiping technology takes on a person's brain. In the end, he got his just desserts by having his own brain erased and effectively having his name changed to Toot Toot McBumbersnazzle.
Yes. I am Toot Toot McBumbersnazzle. Cheers! Toot Toot is my
Honestly,
name.
it's a pretty light sentence considering all he'd done, but hey, as long as he isn't hurting anyone anymore. Honestly, I think it's great that he's able to live a harmless, peaceful life as a bard, and he's been decapitated. Okay. Now, I've heard of shifting gears in life, but this is ridiculous! Closing out this category is one of the most evil villains in Disney Channel history, Emperor Belos. Looking at him sympathetically for a very short moment, I'll say this for Belos. Formerly Philip Whitbane, if nothing else, a 17th century witch hunter who found himself transported to a realm full of nothing but witches and demons, would naturally have some reservations. Even so, I'm sure there were better ways to react than a systematic genocide, not to mention defying the laws of nature to go through with it, sucking out Palisman staff magic to extend his lifespan, which I'm like 90% would count as witchcraft in and of itself. Thankfully, after years of psychologically manipulating his people into worshipping him, he got his comeuppance when the Collector seemingly wiped him out in a single blow during the season 2 finale.
Too slow! You guys look slow too.
Beyond just being splattered on the wall, though, Belos barely survived this, using Hunter's body as a vessel to complete his plan in the human realm.
What?
But after a powered-up Luz defeated him at his strongest point,
Don't just stand there.
Belos was reduced to his old, shriveled-up human self, forced to endure boiling rain and subsequently be stomped to death by Ida, King, and Rain.
That was extremely satisfying.
Gotta love a show full of all sorts of magical hijinks ending with a good old-fashioned curb stomping. But if that's not enough for you, worry not, there are a few more villains who suffered, say the line, fates worse than death. Demona is up next, and honestly, when your name has demon in it, it's almost like destiny for you to be a villain. Regardless, Demona wasn't always evil. Rather, she was a proud gargoyle warrior who was driven insane by a combination of resentment towards humans for their poor treatment of her kind and guilt over her betrayal of the Wyvern clan that ultimately got them cursed in the first place.
All humanity has to pay for what they did to our kind.
Still, everything Demona does is for the sake of an eventual human genocide, and despite this, she never gets punished for too long, always escaping accountability from the law. But when you think about it, she's been living with all of this for over 1,000 years.
The complete destruction of the human race.
Her obsessive hatred of humanity has taken over her whole life, and if the comments of other characters are anything to go by, she's gonna be staying on that path for the rest of her natural life until she goes completely insane or has to finally face up to the fact that she herself is the cause of all of her own problems. It's a bed she made for herself to lie in, so we can't act like she doesn't deserve it, but that kind of psychological torment is something we wouldn't wish on our worst enemies. The Bronze Medal of Brutality goes to the main villain of the DuckTales reboot, Bradford Buzzard. Here's what we learn about that infamous punishment at Magica's hands, or her magic at least. I guess she must have a hard time dealing with grief in a healthy way, because despite knowing firsthand how much it hurts to have a loved one turned into a non-sentient animal, that's exactly the choice she makes for Bradford's fate, reducing this would-be ruler into a mere pet.
Please, no, I'm not a villain!
No, you certainly are not.
I guess she just wanted to figure out if seeing a hated one turn into a mindless animal would feel better. I'm sure that if nothing else, seeing a guy who deserved this fate suffer it was a lot more pleasant than seeing someone who didn't. Oh, Dispel is today's runner-up of brutality. In the original DuckTales show, he was more of a gag character than anything else. But he served as good motivation for his sister, Magica Dispel, who wanted to snatch Scrooge's #1 dime to change him back from a cleverly named raven into his regular sentient duck form.
Well, don't just sit there. Let's take over the world.
We never really saw that original form, though. That was until the 2017 reboot, where one episode reveals that the cause of Poe turning into a simple-minded raven was him taking a proverbial magic bullet from his sister that was meant for Scrooge. When he managed to reflect it back towards Magica, Poe jumped in front of her at the last moment to spare her from being turned into a mindless animal.
Come on, you know I don't know how to turn people back.
I'm sorry.
We can't say this isn't necessarily deserved, since Poe himself took sick pleasure in turning personified animals into animalified animals, but it definitely adds a more tragic twist to the story. You gotta hate it when the one time a villain does something nice, that's when karma decides to kick their butt. But while Poe is likely never going to be able to act like himself again, at least he can act with some level of freedom. Prometheus the Fearbringer is one of the more memorable one-off villains in the Owl House, and ironically, one of the ones we know the least about. But that doesn't stop it from suffering the most brutal fate in Disney Channel villain history. All we know is that this fear-mongering monster is kept imprisoned under Hexside, and every year it regains strength and tries to wreak havoc on the Boiling Isles. Why they decided the best place for a dangerous supernatural horror story like this was a makeshift high school is beyond me, but on that fateful day called Grom, one allegedly lucky student is selected to put old Grommy in his place and keep him sealed away until the next year. Only getting one chance per year to act of your own volition at all is bad enough, but tack on the fact that Prometheus, being a shape-shifting fear demon and all, is likely immortal. Think about it, if it weren't, why would they keep it imprisoned only to have to fight it again once per year when they could just zap it away and be done with it? Even for a seemingly heartless monster, this is a tough pill to swallow. Grom only gets one chance per year to escape captivity, and every time it gets beaten up by a randomly selected child and arrested until its strength is restored next year. And this guy's in just one episode, man.